Melissa used to think the lazy people in the office were getting away with something. They left on time. They seemed calm. They rarely looked stressed. Meanwhile, she was constantly juggling deadlines, fixing problems, and taking on responsibilities that somehow kept multiplying. Then one day she realized something unexpected. The difference wasn't work ethic. The difference was that they understood a game she had been playing the hard way for years. And if conversations like this resonate with you, you're in the right place. Here at You and Me at Work, we talk about the hidden side of corporate life, the things most people learn the hard way. So before we continue, consider subscribing. New videos every week on workplace psychology, career strategy, and surviving corporate life without losing yourself along the way. For most of her career, Melissa believed success was simple. Work harder, take ownership, be dependable. Do that consistently enough and eventually things would work out. At least that's what she thought. But the longer she worked, the more she noticed a pattern that didn't make sense. The people who seemed most exhausted were often the people contributing the most. The ones everyone relied on, the ones who stepped in when things went wrong, the ones who genuinely cared. At the same time, some of the least stressed employees appeared to move through their careers just fine. They weren't constantly overwhelmed. They weren't carrying every crisis on their shoulders. And somehow they survived year after year without burning themselves out. The more Melissa observed them, the more she realized something important. Most of them weren't lazy. They simply understood how the system worked. Because corporate life isn't driven by effort alone. It's shaped by expectations, perception, incentives, and human behavior. And sometimes the people who look the most relaxed understand those rules better than the people working the hardest. The first thing Melissa noticed was how selective they were with their attention. Early in her career, she treated almost every task as equally important. An email would get rewritten several times. A report would be reviewed over and over. A presentation slide could consume far more time than it deserved. She believed professionalism meant giving everything her absolute best. Looking back, part of that was professionalism. Part of it was perfectionism. Meanwhile, some coworkers seemed perfectly comfortable delivering work that was simply good enough. Not sloppy, not careless, just finished. At first, she couldn't understand it. Why wouldn't someone give 100%? But eventually, she started asking a different question. Why was she giving 100% to things that barely affected the outcome? Nobody was studying every sentence she wrote. Nobody was rewarding the extra hour spent polishing a document that would be skimmed for 30 seconds. The people she once judged weren't avoiding effort. They were protecting it. They knew where excellence mattered and where it didn't. They focused on the projects people actually remembered, the responsibilities that carried real consequences, the work that genuinely moved the needle. Everything else received an appropriate amount of attention and no more. That realization stayed with her because many employees don't burn out from having too much work. They burn out from treating every task like it's equally important. The second lesson was much harder to accept. Being good at your job and being visible at your job are not the same thing. For years, Melissa believed strong results would naturally get noticed. If she contributed enough value, people would recognize it. If she worked hard enough, opportunities would eventually arrive. That sounds fair. It just isn't always how organizations work. Melissa remembers spending lunch breaks at her desk while other people were building relationships, talking to colleagues, joining discussions, participating in projects outside their immediate responsibilities. At the time, she assumed she was being more productive. Then opportunities started appearing. Leadership initiatives, cross-functional projects, assignments that exposed people to senior management. And she noticed something interesting. The same names kept surfacing. Not necessarily because those employees were the most talented, but because people knew who they were. Managers remembered them. Coworkers trusted them. Their names felt familiar. That's when Melissa realized visibility wasn't some shallow corporate trick. It was basic human psychology. People naturally remember those they interact with. Familiarity creates trust, and trust often creates opportunity. If you've ever felt like you're doing far more than people realize, you're probably not imagining it. A lot of hardworking professionals quietly experience the same thing. Share your experience in the comments. You may be surprised how many others can relate. The third lesson came from something Melissa once considered one of her greatest strengths. She hated watching things fail. Whenever a project was in trouble, she stepped in. Whenever someone missed a deadline, she offered help. Whenever a problem appeared, she felt responsible for solving it. At first, that seemed like a positive quality, and in many situations it was. The problem was what happened over time. The more often she rescued difficult situations, the more people expected her to rescue the next one. Nobody officially assigned her that responsibility. She gradually inherited it, one small expectation at a time. A deadline that needed saving, a customer issue that needed attention, a project that needed just a little help. Without realizing it, Melissa became the person everyone turned to when things went wrong. Not because of her title, because she always showed up. The difficult part was that she couldn't simply walk away. Other people could. She couldn't. If a client was disappointed, it bothered her. If the team struggled, she felt responsible. If a project was heading toward failure, she couldn't ignore it. That mindset made her valuable, but it also made her vulnerable because responsibility without limits eventually turns into a burden. And once people become accustomed to your help, they stop seeing it as extra. They start seeing it as normal. That's how dependable employees slowly end up carrying far more than they were ever hired to carry. The fourth lesson was probably the most practical. Workplaces often reward competence with more work. When Melissa was younger, she viewed trust as a reward. If important projects landed on her desk, that meant people respected her abilities. If managers relied on her, that meant she was doing something right. And to be fair, she was. The problem was that every new vote of confidence came attached to another responsibility, another project, another deadline, another problem to solve. Over time, she noticed a pattern. Whenever a difficult client appeared, her name came up. Whenever a project became complicated, someone called her. Whenever a deadline looked impossible, she was expected to help. Meanwhile, some coworkers seemed largely unaffected by the chaos, not because they were performing better, but because nobody expected them to carry the same weight. Melissa eventually learned that many leadership experts call this the competence tax. The more capable you become, the more demands get placed on you. The more reliable you are, the harder it becomes to say no. The more problems you solve, the more problems people bring your way. And if you're not careful, success starts creating the exact conditions that lead to exhaustion. That's why boundaries matter. Not because you don't care, not because you're unwilling to help, but because no one can spend an entire career operating in crisis mode. If you've ever been given extra work simply because people know you'll get it done, leave the word boundary in the comments. You're definitely not the only one. The final lesson may be the most uncomfortable. Sometimes the people who appear less ambitious create less resistance around them. Melissa used to believe organizations consistently rewarded the strongest performer. Experience taught her something more complicated. Performance matters, but emotions matter too. Someone who constantly points out problems can unintentionally make others uncomfortable. Someone who always pushes for improvement can create pressure without meaning to. Someone who consistently raises the bar may not be viewed the same way by everyone in the room. Meanwhile, employees who keep a lower profile often feel easier to work around. They don't challenge existing dynamics. They don't create comparison. They don't force people to question their own performance. That doesn't necessarily make them better employees, but it can make them less threatening. There's also another reality that rarely gets discussed. Replacing employees is expensive. Hiring takes time. Training takes time. Mistakes cost money. As long as someone performs well enough and avoids major problems, many organizations prefer stability over disruption. Melissa didn't particularly enjoy learning that lesson, but understanding it helped her stop blaming herself. For years, she looked at less stressed coworkers and assumed they possessed something she lacked. Maybe they were smarter, maybe they were more talented, maybe they had discovered a secret she somehow missed. Eventually, she realized the difference wasn't necessarily ability, it was perspective. They understood where effort produced results and where effort quietly disappeared without recognition. And that may be the biggest lesson in this entire story. The goal isn't becoming lazy. The goal isn't avoiding responsibility. The goal isn't lowering your standards. It's learning the difference between commitment and self-sacrifice, between excellence and perfectionism, between helping and carrying, between being dependable and being endlessly available. because those things are not the same. Melissa still believes hard work matters. She still believes integrity matters. She still believes taking pride in your work matters. What changed was her understanding of limits. Today, she knows protecting your energy isn't weakness, it's wisdom. A career isn't won in a single quarter. It's built over decades. And if you spend every year proving how reliable you are without protecting yourself, eventually there won't be much left to give. Maybe that's why Melissa sees those seemingly lazy coworkers differently now. Not because she wants to become one of them, but because she finally understands what she missed for so many years. Some people aren't working less because they care less. Some people are simply choosing their battles more carefully. And sometimes understanding the game matters just as much as playing it well. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If Melissa's story felt familiar, there's a good chance you're not alone. Many dedicated employees spend years carrying weight they were never supposed to carry, and many don't realize it until exhaustion starts feeling normal. In the next video, we'll talk about a different workplace trap, subtle signs a company may be trying to push you out without ever saying it directly. It's more common than most people think, especially for people who care deeply about doing good work. Until then, take care of yourself, protect your time, protect your peace. And remember, surviving corporate life isn't just about working hard. It's about making sure your dedication doesn't become the reason you burn out. I hope you'll stay with us here at You and Me at Work. We're building a space for people trying to survive corporate life without losing themselves in the process. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.